My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Pixel Patch. I'm a joyful geek with an expertise in gaming, both tabletop and video.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses.
And by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, manga, comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, groups, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Jack, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk and Logan, X-Men, Avengers, Allen, Galaxy, Guardians, Star Trek, Prick, Prick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks from Gather Around, and join them in the Big Bad Shark, Average Joe and Pixel Patch, they peek under the microscope.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
A sleepy, coffee nerd culture. But don't worry, we'll wake him up. A few slaps to the face. He has a sleeper hit this week, because we're talking about cult classics.
Oh, wow. How long have you taken to come with that one?
I came up with that on spot because I panicked.
Wow. Well done. That seems like the kind of joke it would have taken you like all week to come up with.
Oh, man. All right. Well, there you go. I will happily take that quick off the cuff. I am wearing cuffs this week because I've just come from a wedding. And, we'll do it.
So I had the opportunity to go see a movie this week before it was officially released to the public.
Ooh, very nice. Which one?
It's a little film called Rocketman.
Yeah.
It is not about a superhero named Rocketman.
Right.
It's
not the Eddie Murphy Rocketman from 1996. Are
you thinking of Pluto Nash?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's also a movie called The Rocketeer.
Yep.
Which is kind of like a superhero movie.
It's a superhero movie, I'll say, because he's got the whole secret identity and all that. If you haven't seen The Rocketeer,
I haven't seen it.
Oh yeah, that one's good. That's fun.
No, but Rocketman.
For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a rock and roller.
Reggie, stop making that noise.
Before he changed music,
Daniel is traveling tonight on...
Terrible.
He had to reinvent himself.
You gotta kill the person you were born to be to become the person you want to be.
My name is Elton John.
On May 31st.
The pain, the joy, and the sorrow, you turn it into songs that people love. That's your gift.
Rocketman, in theaters May 31st.
Is a musical about the life of Elton John.
Yeah.
I kind of won tickets to an advanced screening at a trivia event that I was at.
Oh, nice.
I was actually hosting it, and this event promoter just sort of came in and handed me these passes to give away to the winners.
Please, take these.
And then he gave me 2 tickets for myself.
Oh, all right.
So a friend and I went and saw Rocketman, and I don't think this is the way I'd want to see movies because basically they give out more passes than there were seats in the theater.
That's no fun.
So basically it was on a first come, first served basis. So they said, should make sure you're there by 6:30 so you can get in. And we just happened to get to the theater early anyway because we were going to eat there.
There was a lineup.
But we were there at 5:40 and there were already people lined up to see the movie. So almost an hour before the promoter said to be there. And we got in the lineup around 6, and so we still waited in line for half an hour, and there's this big line of people came in behind us, and it just made me realize I can't remember the last time I waited in line to see a movie.
Yeah, because it's all assigned seating now,
which I love. You can literally just roll in 2 minutes before the movie, not worry at all about getting a seat.
I think people don't get stressed out as much. It's just thank you movie theaters for making that change, because my goodness, so much better.
So all that to say, I'm thankful that that's not the typical movie-going experience anymore. And even though I didn't pay anything for seeing Rocketman, I think I would have preferred to have paid in because it would have saved myself a lot of time.
Now the question, did you enjoy the movie?
So...
Awkward chuckle, gonna drop a few truth bombs.
No, it's a really fun movie.
Nice.
The butt comes in, I'm not a huge Elton John fan.
That's fair.
So I don't know much of his story. And I feel like I was able to enjoy Rocketman in the way my parents were able to enjoy Avengers Endgame.
That makes sense. They're there. It's a fun movie. You're like, okay, this is a movie. I'm not that heavily invested into it. I have general knowledge of it. Yeah, okay.
Because my parents went and saw Avengers Endgame and they loved it, but they didn't get nearly as much of the references and they just kind of took what they received and enjoyed it. And I feel like that's how I was able to enjoy Rocketman, because I certainly love a lot of Elton John's music, but I didn't know much about his actual life story, and I didn't know if what was being presented in the film was reflective of his actual life.
Right.
I'm sure it's going to get a lot of comparisons to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Which I was going to say, like, it's very odd that they released that so soon afterwards. It seems to be like the music movie year. And you've got over the, my goodness, the Beatles song.
Yesterday,
yeah.
Yeah, well, that's not really a biopic at all. That's like almost like that's an isekai parallel world kind of movie. I'm looking forward to seeing what people say about that. But all to say, Rocketman was not what I expected because it's actually a jukebox musical. So it actually like what
Explain.
Well, so are you familiar with a jukebox musical?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so movies like Mamma Mia.
Okay. Yeah. So the best of hits.
Well, and they take the songs and they try to basically place the songs in the story at a point when, as if it was like a musical, the characters are singing the song and it's reflecting what they're feeling in that moment.
That's super cool. Okay.
So for Rocketman, they actually like use Elton John songs to have Elton John and the other characters essentially sing about what's happening in that moment,
telling that life story. That's super
cool. So it's not like these are the origin stories of the different songs.
No,
but it's like they're using his music to tell his story. And Elton John was known for having a very like kind of like theatrical stage life. So I think choosing to portray his story through like a grand musical is very much in line with who he is. And I know some people criticize Bohemian Rhapsody for not going deep enough into his issues with substance abuse and his personal life.
But this one does. 3 full hours of substance abuse on screen.
Well, no, it's certainly not like that. But they do, like, I actually like feel like I felt the weight of his addictions much more than I did for Freddie Mercury and Bohemian Rhapsody.
I had to step out of the theater and go to rehab for a few days. It was
so it is a very powerful film. It's quite enjoyable. Taron Egerton, who's from the Kingsman movies,
very nice,
is Elton John, and he does an excellent job. He does all his own singing. Which, of course, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you saw Sing, the animated film,
I have not. All right, that makes sense.
He plays a gorilla who does a cover of. He does a cover of an Elton John song,
which is how they probably made that connection in their minds. They're like, you know what, this guy can sing, and we'll make him Elton John. Is he also the guy who plays Peter, or is he that's a different actor?
Peter?
Peter Melark.
Yes, it's a different actor.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's Hunger Games.
Yeah, well, but Kingsman had the guy from Hunger Games in it.
No, Taron Egerton is the main guy from Kingsman. So.
Oh, right.
I think you're thinking of like Ansel Elgort or one of those guys. There's a couple of these kind of youngish, blondish guys who all kind of.
They all look the same. I swear. I'm not throwing you all together in the same container. I am throwing them all together.
Having seen Taron Egerton in the Kingsman movies, and he's in Eddie the Eagle as well.
Right.
He definitely transforms himself for this film. So I will give Rocketman 3.2 out of 4 bat cookies.
Very nice. All right.
So if you have any interest in seeing Rocketman, please go out and see it. It will probably not become a cult classic because it's already loved by the critics, so I'm sure it'll do well enough to be.
And it's got to fail before it becomes famous for that cult classic symbol, which we will go into right now.
So I think
first off, this week, as you know from the episode title, we're talking about cult classics.
Well, one more thing about Rocketman. I would not be surprised if Taron Egerton gets nominated for an Oscar for this performance.
Fantastic. Wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Okay.
But yes, this week we're talking about cult classics.
Mm-hmm.
So these are not films and TV shows and other properties that are, literally have cults dedicated to them. Let's just be clear about that.
We're not sacrificing people by like digging DVDs into them and stuff. Although that would be an interesting cult. That's not what we're doing. It's just something that gets a following afterwards. Like I think some of the modern takes on it are sleeper hits. So something that becomes a hit after it's taken a nap in the general world, and people just kind of discover like, hey, this was a great thing. And it doesn't just apply to movies; it actually applies to games as well. So there's I think Glory to Rome is a board game that became a cult classic. People who played it love the game, but it's out of print. It's hard to find, and everyone who has gotten a copy of it was really good. Or Hero Quest from the 1980s was like a dungeon venturing game, and it is one of the most beloved modern games, so much so that the price is about 6 times higher than when it first came out. You know, it's a collector's item now, but people love the gameplay, but it wasn't big when it first came out enough to get a reprint. So, yeah.
So let's just begin with the definition, because I love having the ability to define the terms of the podcast.
Let's do it. Let's define those terms.
So
let's terminate those defines.
Yeah. So generally, if a movie or a TV show comes out, how do we know it's a success?
Box office money, good reviews, lots of people going to see it and talking about it. Some kind of like the popular psyche, but there's a word for it. It affects, like Fortnite. Everyone knows what Fortnite is because it's affected the populace.
Zeitgeist?
I guess zeitgeist. I don't really like that word, but yes, it affects the zeitgeist in a way.
Okay, people pay tickets to go see movies. How do we know if a TV show is a success?
People talking about it, lots of views, lots of reviews, lots of seasons. Usually you don't get a lot of seasons.
Well, ratings.
Ratings,
right?
Yeah.
Because they used to, and they still do, publish ratings of how many people were watching TV shows.
Yeah.
They can do that. So, all right, we can define that as a film or a TV show or a board game.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know if a board game or a video game is a success?
There are rating boards online, actually. The most famous one is Board Game Geek. That's how I found out about my first board game. I scanned through hundreds of games and found the highest rated game at the time was Primordial Soup. So I went out of town and I bought it. So yeah.
Okay, but can we assume that with games, the number of units sold also comes into effect?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like Catan, 10 million units sold. Like apples to apples, though I don't think it's a good game, it definitely had the whole 7 million sold kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So with movies and video games, board games and books and whatever, you can look at the dollars raised.
Yeah.
You can look at the number of units sold and see, wow, there are a lot of people who are buying this thing as it's brand new, so therefore it becomes popular.
Follow de Monet.
With TV, it's a little harder because you don't directly pay for a single TV show, right? You
What?
pay for yeah.
All right, sorry, too many people are watching this. You're gonna have to pay us more. Wow.
So the ratings are really the only way. The ratings, and now I guess with the modern technology, the number of downloads a
for
show
like
gets
Netflix
afterwards.
and stuff. So like the Netflix originals is really interesting difference because they have what's called metadata. So they just have a big agglomeration of knowledge about how long people will watch a scene for. What episode is watched the most, how long people will binge a series. So like there's so much more information than the weekly release. There's so much more information that can be applied. And so Netflix knows to a variety of angles how well a show is doing. Like if every single person who watches this show binges at least 4 episodes, wow, there must be some great storytelling. How can we recreate that? Yeah.
So what does a TV show or a movie or a game have to do to reach this large an audience?
I'd say a lot of it is good storytelling and marketing. Like with games, a lot of games that you play you can watch them again and play them again and again. Movies, you can watch them again and again. Not always, but most of the time it's something that has good content.
I would argue that doesn't, like, in order for something to be a good story, it doesn't necessarily have to be a popular thing. What makes a movie or a show or whatever popular is that it appeals to a broad audience.
Oh,
a large number of people. Like the reason why Avengers Endgame has the largest opening weekend of any movie is
because everyone can go see a superhero movie.
Or because everyone is interested in seeing that movie.
That makes a lot of sense. So like the most popular board game is not going to be the most complex one, like Gloomhaven, super popular game for board gamers. But if you ask someone like, oh yeah, I know about Catan and Carcassonne and Monopoly. Monopoly should be destroyed, but that's okay. But yeah, everyone knows Catan, and they're like, yeah, this is easy to get into and easy to play.
So we can agree that for something to be popular and a success, air quotes around success.
Yeah, I was about to say, he's doing the air quote thing.
It needs to appeal to a large audience.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
Great. So we got that definition of the way. We know what it means to be popular, to be mainstream, I suppose.
I know what it means to be popular and to be mainstream. I am popular. I am mainstream. Okay, sorry. We're good. Just setting myself up for success.
So to contrast this, we have this idea of the cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
Generally a movie is considered a classic when it's successful and it's received well and it has something unique about it, or the messaging is powerful at the time and has staying power after the fact.
like Ben-Hur, or I'm just thinking all the movies I was like grew up on. Gone with the Wind, like
The Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Yeah. So all this
Sound of Music.
Sound of Music. There we go.
So where we get into this venue of the cult classic is, I think this has always been a thing with art in general, is that sometimes when something is new or different, it isn't necessarily received well by the mass audience.
By the populace at the time.
I think there's many. I'm not going to pretend like I know a lot about visual art, but I do know generally that a lot of famous painters were, and even people like Shakespeare, were kind of like not well regarded in their own lifetime.
Oh no, 100%. Like it's always a constant like, oh well, you know what? Like we've discovered these people after a while, or like the writings of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, like his work is still being expanded upon, and people are still discovering stuff because it took a while for it to get popular, and then it got more and more popular over time. Like I think it took a good 20 years for it to get really some traction.
So there's this old line about how like no artist is respected in their own time.
Yeah.
So the idea of a piece of media arriving on the scene and not finding an audience because it is different, because it it's not understood, or it's too different. That isn't a new idea. That's been around for hundreds of years. Where it comes into like the pop culture we know today is that, especially with the communication tools that exist and have existed for years now, if something is received well, there are many ways in which people can talk about it and share their opinions and get the word out there that people should go and pay attention to it. However, that's really only a phenomenon of the last like 10 years or so. So really, if a film or a show came out even 20 years ago and was unique or quirky, or
you would never know about it. Like it would just disappear. Like
so a cult film or a cult classic or whatever is something that when it arrived on the scene did not find an audience. Did not find a large audience. And unfortunately, in filmmaking and television, in gaming, the name of the game is trying to make a profit, to try and make money.
Because if you don't, your company or your publishing company or the people making it just will not have any funds to continue doing what they're doing. Like, it's just a fact.
So generally, to be considered a cult classic, a piece of media
I thought you were going to say a piece of meat. A piece of meat must.
Sure, a piece of meat must be considered a cult classic when it's left out for a few days. No, but a piece of media is a cult classic when it arrives on the scene and it is a failure.
Right. Yep.
Commercially, critically, I know there's some movies and shows that are considered cult classics now, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yep.
From what I understand, it obviously had ratings strong enough to keep it going for like 6 years, so it must have been received relatively well. Mm-hmm. But it has a large audience that's kind of grown and has become more dedicated to the franchise since its ending. So that would be there's obviously exceptions to all the things we're going to try and create definitions for, but generally, in order for something to become a cult classic, it has to have failed in some way upon its initial release.
Yeah. And then over time, growing a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff we've talked about on the Batch Hour podcast over the years are cult classics.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, wow. That one was initially a failure?
That movie bombed at the box office when it came out.
And now every year, it's like the Christmas movie.
It went to public domain because they didn't want to keep the copyright on the film. Wow. And it was only because it was public domain, every TV station basically was able to use it for free.
Yeah.
So that everyone put it on TV over Christmas, and everyone kind of fell in love with the movie.
Huh.
And that was in the 70s. So that film took 30 years to become popular.
So you're saying I could put sound bites of that movie, like right now in the podcast, we could throw in sound bites.
Well, I think
copyright was renewed.
Yeah, someone got a copyright on it since then.
All right. Well, here's hope.
But we put sound clips in the podcast all the time, and we always put a credit to whoever is the owner of that media in the description, because none of the stuff we use in the podcast is our own, except for the intro theme and the closing, which are contributed by our friends Cackles and Jeremy Eckert. We always give them credit in the description as well, but just in case people don't read that.
Credit where credit is due. Maybe they'll have a cult following in 10, 20 years. They didn't fail, but it's just nice and small little circle that we have. And if it expands and they get a huge following from that, boom, cult classic.
So does this make sense to you, this idea that in order for something to be considered a cult classic, it has to fail?
Mm-hmm. It has to fail or, I would say, also not succeed, which is...
How's that different?
Because failure could be catastrophic. Not succeeding, however, is just like I may put out a book and I may sell enough to cover the cost. It hasn't completely failed, but it wasn't a huge success. Like it was small enough to just like maybe just recoup certain things, and then you're like, all right, kind of thing. Like for example, like I'd almost consider Napoleon Dynamite a cult classic, but it was made on a $10,000 budget, and they made their money back. But it didn't get hugely popular until a couple of years later. However, they didn't fail, but they didn't succeed. It wasn't like super triple blockbuster, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Okay.
I think Firefly is probably one of the best examples of a cult classic TV show.
Yeah.
Or even Doctor Who. Didn't Doctor Who initially like kind of do terribly in the UK, and that kind of went away?
It got like bigger and bigger. They got a huge budget after like a couple months. Like of course, for like 30 years there was no Doctor Who, and the first season barely made it off the ground, and then people just started following it and enjoying it, and then they brought it back. And
certainly in the case of Firefly, we talked about this when we talked about that show. The reason that show didn't do well wasn't necessarily because of the actual show itself. It was because of how the TV studio chose to market it and chose to air it.
yeah.
So sometimes these things fail not on their own merit because of the circumstances around their release.
Yeah, so they could have a decent story, or in the case of Firefly, a really fun universe that people want to see and want to hear about, but they don't get the chance to. And, eventually they're given that ability.
So a cult classic has to fail or not succeed.
Yep.
And in order for it to truly become this cult classic, it has to develop some form of audience, some form of fan base that is attached to the film in some way, or the show, and they are essentially continue to be interested in it way after its release.
Yep.
So Wikipedia actually has a bunch of different categories of cult classics.
Ooh, all right, let's go into those.
I thought we'd talk about them briefly here.
I'm down.
So the first one it's called So Bad It's Good.
I love the So Bad It's Good section. It is, so I grew up with a TV series called Mystery Science Theater 3000. And they had a whole bunch of, once again, public domain bad movies that these three guys would sit in front of and make fun of. And it was just, shot in this tiny local studio, as they do in the U.S., and it was broadcast locally. And then people were like, this is great. You guys should make more of this. And as the years went on, just more and more people fell in love with it, to the point where I think 10 years or 15 years after it was done, Netflix created their own Mystery Science Theater series.
Right. So just to clarify, Mystery Science Theater itself is not So Bad It's Good.
They make a fun of movies that are so bad it's good.
Yeah. Now, I would argue Mystery Science Theater 3000 is also a cult classic.
Yes. So it's like cultception.
But it wouldn't fall into this category of So Bad It's Good.
Right. So
it certainly makes fun of the So Bad It's Goods.
So a So Bad It's Good is a movie where you can have some snacks or have a drink, watch, and just laugh at how terribly made things are. Like someone punches someone and you can see their fist is clearly 3 feet away from their face and they fall over. All like props that are made out of aluminum and cardboard. And
so would you have a favorite of this category?
Oh my goodness. This Island Earth, I recommend to anyone out there. It is watchable. It is definitely watchable, but it is silly. And if you're not too squeamish, or if you're very curious, Trolls 2, Two Times the Terrifying, is a movie about goblins turning people into vegetables. And spoiler alert, the biggest twist in the movie is that the town that they're in, the town of Nilgob, is the word goblin spelled backwards. And it's the town where all the goblins live. And there is a wonderful moment in the movie where the character looks over and one of his friends has been turned into vegetables, and the goblins are eating him, and he goes, "They're eating her. They're gonna eat me. Oh my God!" And it just keeps going. It's a weird movie.
I can't give any answer to this other than The Room.
I would agree. I hope that you would put The Room in there after having covered it.
And the weirdest part about that movie is that with most So Bad It's Good films, it's like you can sort of tell that they were making a bad movie, and so they just sort of just kind of went for it. With The Room, Tommy Wiseau seemed to genuinely think he was making like an Oscar-worthy film.
Which is absolutely crazy.
It truly feeds into the whole theory that he's like some kind of alien who doesn't understand human beings. The second type is called camp and guilty pleasures.
Ooh.
The examples they give here are movies I've never heard of before, but it generally seems like films that are super cheesy, I suppose.
That makes sense. Like campy. I was actually talking with a friend of mine about 2 weeks ago, and they used the word campy. They're just like, "Oh, I like Princess Bride because it's campy." And I was like, "What does that mean?" They're like, "Oh, it's like super cheesy. It has like the classic ideas of romance and stuff like that." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." But I didn't know why the word campy was in there. So I know we searched it up, but like stories you tell around campfires? I don't know.
There's a Flash Gordon movie.
No way.
From like 1980. I didn't watch the whole thing. I only watched like 5 minutes of it. But needless to say, I think it would fit into this category of film.
Super cheesy sci-fi?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. All right. I've got to look that up now because Flash Gordon was always a fun little...
Category number 3 is nostalgia.
That's an easy one for most people.
So these are movies like Grease.
Yep.
That aren't really if you just try and absorb it as a film on its own, it's not the best.
No.
But a lot of people hold nostalgia for it because it's about the 50s and it was released.
I grew up with this and like this movie or Batman and Robin. I grew up with that. It was such a good movie. No, his armor had nipples. This is just a thing.
I mean, people would say even like Back to the Future, because it is nostalgia for the 50s and the 80s, except that movie was a huge success. Mm-hmm. So if we go off of our definition that a film has to not be a success upon its initial release, Back to the Future would be excluded.
Mm-hmm. It definitely gets close to being a cult classic, though. Had it been less successful, I think it would have been definitely one of those ultimate cult classics in the nostalgia area.
All right, this next category is called midnight movies.
What is that?
It says midnight movies as a reaction against the political and cultural conservatism in America, identifies the movement as running the gamut from anarchistic to libertarian, united in their anti-establishment attitude and punk aesthetic.
So they'd grab these movies that were too violent or too over the top, and they're like, you know what? We're just going to watch it at midnight, and we're all going to meet here and watch it. And they'd always watch it at that time of the night, kind of thing.
I don't think it's films that actually get watched at midnight.
Okay, there is The Room is watched at midnight, though.
Yes, that's certainly an element of the cult classic experience. But
right.
I think what they're referring to are kind of like anti-establishment, like things that kind of go against the norm of society.
Oh, interesting.
So one of the examples they cite here is Office Space.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Office Space?
I have seen Office Space.
Yeah, so that's very much like against corporate America and the way that's like portrays office life.
Yeah.
And certainly it didn't financially make any money when it came out, but it certainly developed an audience over the years.
Yeah.
So I think they call it midnight just because it's like kind of like the nighttime is kind of hidden away from the mainstream in that sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
They also mentioned Donnie Darko here.
Donnie Darko is a series that I've wanted to watch for the past 10 years. I a friend of mine was huge into it in high school, and I never got into it. I really enjoyed the way that Donnie Darko did a lot of extra world building outside of the movies. So you could go to websites that had hints of Donnie Darko stuff in it, or it's all this parallel universe stuff. It was really neat. They definitely had some really cool world building thrown in there. And one day I'll watch it.
Category number 4 is art and exploitation.
What?
So these would basically be films that, again, cover subject matter that is to whatever extreme.
Right.
For things that would be considered taboo in the time that it came out. So because it was so controversial upon its initial release, didn't find a large enough audience, and then as time goes on, they're find their niche audiences that really enjoy that subject matter and run with it.
Oh, interesting.
They don't really mention any specific movies here, so
And I think we're fine with that.
the fifth type, did I count that right? Yes, the fifth type is called B films or genre films.
Okay. And that's pretty easy to get into. It's just like, it's not those AAA movies. I think Starship Troopers would be a B film kind of thing. It's a movie that tries to be a Hollywood movie in some cases, but they don't have the budget to quite do everything right, or sometimes they don't have a really good budget at all, and it's not what we would call a AAA movie, which is, that your billion-dollar Hollywood productions. It's not even your A movies, which is your, $100,000 production. It's a B movie. It's what they had available, and sometimes they're decent, sometimes they're real bad.
Well, this one YouTuber I listen to, and by listen to I mean watch because it's YouTube.
I watch, listen, and learn from this YouTube.
She explains that for a film to become a huge success, it has to apply to all four quadrants of audiences. So you have
Interesting.
people under the age of 25, people over the age of 25, and then men and women. So there are certain films that exist that will only appeal to certain demographics.
Interesting.
And so a film that can be all four quadrants, it will be hitting the largest audience to be the most successful. So genre films like this, or B films, are so niche that they would only interest a certain audience. So like they mentioned The Princess Bride here.
Right.
And part of why that film didn't do well is because it was marketed wrong. It was marketed as like this romantic kind of drama of sorts, and it's obviously much more of a comedy.
Yeah.
So the audience it was marketing to was a certain quadrant, but actually the film has like a more almost four quadrant appeal.
Interesting. Now, but it's funny that that's added in, because at the same time you think, if it has the four quadrant appeal, why wasn't it famous? Like, why didn't it do well? But I know what you mean. Like, it has to be a failure, but also hit those marks. Like, man, there's a lot that goes into this.
Yeah, so this would be movies like Blade Runner.
Yeah, there you go.
Blade Runner is such and really this is why a lot of anime films never do well, because it's marketing to such a niche audience that it just doesn't reach a large enough group to hit mainstream success.
Yeah, and they try in some cases to actually, make it more mainstream. Like they're casting Scarlett Johansson in the place of
anyone Asian.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm losing it. I just don't have the brain right now.
You're thinking of Ghost in the Shell.
Ghost in the Shell. There you go. Like they're casting it, but they're also forgetting their original audience and stuff like that. Like and at the same time, they're not focusing enough on making a good story. They're just trying to make a Ghost in the Shell story.
And then the final category, I mean, there's nonfiction, but that's just
nonfiction.
Animation.
That makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of like those Sundance Film Festival, Animation Fest. Actually, recently, there was something that I almost would say could have become cult classics if it hadn't been put on Netflix, which was Love, Death, and Robots. And Love, Death, and Robots is like 10 mini episodes. Half of them I wouldn't recommend for younger audience, that are these small stories told in different universes that either have love or death or robots or all three. And those are things that, you could go down, some of these go down to university and watch them put these on as like an end of year kind of display, and like, okay, cool. And maybe your group would latch onto this one episode and share it around, and it would get more popular over time. But with Love, Death, and Robots, they just released all of them, and I think it did decently well.
I think films that they actually lump all the anime into this, into animation.
Nice.
Which is interesting, because animation is more of a, it's not necessarily I guess it's a type, but it's anime is like animation is like a medium of film and not like a genre.
And I think that's like a lack of understanding of what animation is on the part of a lot of critics. But
for the sake of what Wikipedia says, we'll just go with it.
Yeah.
So a film that comes to mind for me here is not just movies like Ghost in the Shell, like the original anime film, but even things like The Iron Giant.
Oh, yeah.
That movie did terribly when it came out.
But people still love watching it. And I go, you stay.
It sounded like E.T.
Aaron. But even, let's say, Studio Ghibli, which is big in Japan, but it's slowly been getting bigger and bigger in the U.S. So in a way, like, already successful, but building a bigger overseas audience in a way. Or even the growth of American anime, like Avatar, Legend of Korra.
Let's not. This
American
podcast is
animation.
previous. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, that's that. Oh, don't get me started. there.
All the words, all the feelings.
Okay, so that's all the categories, but hearing all the different categories, do you have a favorite?
B movies are definitely like a huge one. And I'm trying to think. Nostalgia depends on the nostalgia. Like animation, definitely. I love little underground animation movies. Like if I stumble across this like beautiful short animation piece, I love sharing those. B movies, I wish more people around me enjoyed B movies because I enjoy cringing over bad movies sometimes, but a lot of people don't understand it. It's very hard for people to grasp that. Yeah, those are my two favorites.
Interesting.
How about-
I would share some like the animation, obviously.
Yeah.
The so bad's good ones.
Yeah.
I
I think I looped that in with my B movies. Yeah, the so bad it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a B movie, again, if it's like dedicated to a specific genre, like they even threw Singing in the Rain in there.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And I wouldn't say that is a like, oh, this is terrible to watch, but it fits in there because it appeals to that certain genre audience, and it doesn't hit all four quadrants in that sense.
Nice.
But TV shows is kind of a bit of a different monster because, again, the ratings kind of give you an indicator of success when a show first premieres, if it's going to be big or not. But unlike movies, they can decide to cancel a TV show before, like, the movie is the movie.
And the movie's done.
The movie's done.
Whereas the storyline of the TV show not necessarily going to get completed.
Exactly. So movies, I guess, their ability to become a success or not, it's kind of done in one shot because the movie's out and that's it.
You got one shot, one moment to make it. Eminem.
With TV shows, however, the first impression really is a huge, like often pilots are made for TV shows, and after seeing a pilot, the studio people decide if they want to go with the show or not.
Yeah.
So even if the pilot isn't good,
then it's never going to get off the ground.
Yeah.
And no one's going to ever see it.
which is that it's just so the TV side is kind of different scenario. So like when I look at a list of cult classic TV shows, it's got stuff like Mystery Science Theater 3000,
Fantastic stuff.
Veronica Mars.
Yeah.
It only went on for a few years, but it actually got a movie, and I think there's going to be another one, if I recall seeing that somewhere. It got a movie that was financed by Kickstarter, if you remember this.
I did remember that. Yeah. That was huge.
Because there were that many fans for the show.
That was one of the biggest TV re-releases. Like Kickstarter doing a TV show budget was something completely unheard of at the time. And for those of you who don't know what Kickstarter is, it's you put out an idea into the world. You're like, hey, I want to make this thing, and you crowdfund it. So you're like, can you give me whatever amount you can, and we'll give you like maybe a small token of appreciation, but we want to make this a reality. And if enough people believe in what you're making, which is how a lot of board games are made, they're like, hey, we have this board game idea, can we make it? Then the money goes to the creators, and sometimes they follow through with their promises, and sometimes, I'd say less than 10% of the time, but it still happens. Sometimes they just take the money and the project never gets done, but such as it is.
With these TV shows that are cult classics, often a really good way to see how big their audience is if they come back in some way.
Yeah.
If they get revived later on. So here it has the Trailer Park Boys, because that originally aired for 6 years and then went off the air for 7 years before Netflix brought it back.
Yeah.
So again, that only happened because there was a fan base of people who were watching the show, and they made a couple movies in between too. So, I think it's kind of silly and not the most intelligent show, but it obviously has an audience large enough for it to keep coming back.
I am the liquor.
Parks and Recreation, I never saw it, but
I finally did watch it, and the first 2 seasons, I can see why it like slowly got that cult following. Like, it wasn't the best produced or even the funniest, but it just got a lot of heart, and it just got better and better as time went on. And then, of course, Chris Pratt becoming famous made people like go back to watch his older stuff, and that like got better and better as time went on, and I think the audience around it got bigger and bigger.
have you ever heard of Twin Peaks?
I have heard of Twin Peaks.
So it only had 2 seasons, But then it got a revival. I think it was like last year.
Yeah. So Twin Peaks was, I think, the biggest cult classic for me to sit down and watch, because I'd been playing a couple of video games at the time called Persona that had this like creepy mystery going on in the background, like this normal world next to the super weird world, and someone was just like it's been heavily inspired by Twin Peaks, and I was like, cool, like I've always been very curious about it. So finally, about a year ago, sat down with some friends and we watched the first season and part of the second season. Haven't finished it yet, but I'm very excited for watching through the reboot.
Star Trek, the original series.
No way. Really?
Well, you think about it, that show went on for 3 years, and it ended in 1969, and they didn't make the first Star Trek movie till 1978. So basically there was a good almost 10 years where nothing was happening. And
I'm impressed that they actually made that series in the 60s. That's impressive sci-fi.
Yeah, it was a trailblazer in many ways, and it has 13 films, many spin-offs and whatevers that came from it, and all that came that show was canceled after 3 years.
Right.
If that show didn't develop the Trekkie fan base that exists to this day,
then we wouldn't have all the and Star Trek copies nowadays. Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know it was canceled. I thought they just kept on making Star Trek stuff over the years, but no. Wow.
Arrested Development.
That one I know a lot about. Yeah, and funny thing is, it feels a lot like Parks and Rec. I think Parks and Rec is a little bit cleaner, but Arrested Development is one of those that, came back after a while, started off, decent, and then got better as time went on.
Community.
Community is a cult classic?
Well, again, I think they're calling it that because of the fan base it developed after the show.
That makes a lot of sense. And then Yahoo picked them up for season 6.
Did they? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the first 5 seasons, that was it. And they weren't going to get a 6th season. And then Yahoo teamed up with them, which was the weirdest team up ever, because Yahoo is Yahoo. Like, you don't anticipate them actually doing anything. They're the search bar that never could. Sorry, Yahoo. And then they picked up season 6, and then the joke was #6 seasons and a movie. We haven't had the Community movie yet, but apparently it's coming. So that is true. I never thought about that way.
I've never seen this, but they're talking about Freaks and Geeks.
Freaks and Geeks is a lot of fun. Have you seen How I Met Your Mother?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Just for the actor. 1 second. So there's that married couple.
Well, I recognize the cast, and I know it's a cult classic just because I know it has this huge fan base, even though it was a show that only lasted 1 year.
It is fun. It's a little bit ridiculous. It's like watching. Oh man, I don't want to say Christmas Story. What's that? The Breakfast Club. It's like watching The Breakfast Club, but with like a lot of different stuff going on. No, it's a fun TV series to enjoy.
Futurama, that show was on for 4 years initially, and then got canceled.
Yeah.
Then it came back, and then it got canceled again, and it came back again.
And then it became such a running joke that in one of the intro scenes, they're like, Futurama, hopefully Fox won't cancel us before the end of this episode. And they constantly poke fun at the producers. But yeah, people loved the show. But at the very beginning, I think this is one of those series that people didn't know what to do with, because it was more offensive than The Simpsons. It was some pretty risque humor in some areas. Not all episodes, but there was definitely some really weird stuff. And I guess a lot of people, or even a lot of producers, didn't know what to do with it. And then eventually that kind of TV series got its following with like Family Guy, Disenchantment, Final Space, all these TV series that are like the cartoons for adults, animation for adults. Like, yeah.
We already talked about Firefly, but again, the brown coat fan base exists because the show developed an audience after it finished airing.
And of all of the cult classics TV series, I think it's one of the most easy to spot ones. It was 1 season, 12 episodes. That was it. It was gone. And people have just been going and going and going and be like, you need to bring it back, you need to bring it back. So much so that the original actor, Nathan Fillion, would love to bring it back. And in all of his movies, he will constantly reference it. In Castle, he's like, hey, I'm dressed up as a cowboy. Didn't you do that last year? No, last year was a space cowboy. In a very famous Greek mythology kids young adult series, Percy Jackson, Nathan Fillion shows up and goes, yes, I have this rare artifact of this excellent Greek television series, which unfortunately, like too many good things, was canceled before its time. It's the fans are very strong with that one, and there's comic books, but I don't think they'll shut up until the series itself comes back.
They interestingly have Monty Python's Flying Circus on here.
That makes a lot of sense.
It aired, I guess, on American TV for 5 years. I feel like that show probably has found some audience because I hear a lot about it now.
And Holy Grail, I think, was a consistent one for us. Like, it just didn't have a big production budget. They couldn't afford horses, so they used coconuts as horses on set. So from off screen, you hear like click, 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 and it's just a guy holding invisible reins in front of him. That lack of budget and their creativity and on having to make so many weird oddball skits really led to them becoming like a household favorite.
Xena Warrior Princess.
I did watch some episodes as a kid. I just did not understand, but there is a group for that.
And just to kind of wrap this up, they mentioned Kids in the Hall, which I find interesting because
I never watched it.
That's a Canadian sketch comedy show.
Oh, neat.
But I don't know anything else about it.
Huh. I don't know nothing. I don't know nothing about nothing.
So I'm sure you guys can, maybe as we were talking about those different shows and the movies, you're kind of thinking of how can I classify them into those categories of cult classics. And really the secret sauce comes down to it has to find an audience. It doesn't have to be a huge audience, but it has to be a dedicated audience that will essentially be missionary for their product.
You could be that audience, guys. You could do it. Like I think an online animation, Strong Bad Emails, from 2004 to 2008. There was these like weekly emails that got answered, and people nowadays keep wanting them to bring it back, and there's Kickstarters for their board games and stuff. 10 years later, people are still going on about it. So, it's keep at it. You could be that fan base.
Yeah, and I genuinely think the fan bases that are the strongest are the ones that fight for their show or movie because they truly believe that it was given a disservice upon its release.
Yeah.
So I know the Brown Coats are super passionate about Firefly because of how Fox promoted it and didn't do it a good job by putting on like the Friday night 9 p.m. time slot or whatever.
Yep.
My favorite cult classic, if we're going to go there.
We're going there.
Across all mediums, has to be Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Interesting. Never heard of it.
Can't be too careful with all those weirdos around.
A soaring new adventure. Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. The animated movie. Coming for a Christmas you'll never forget.
You've never heard of it?
Never heard of it. Gonna have to watch it. So what is this?
So this is the only animated Batman movie that has gotten a wide theatrical release in North America.
Interesting. I thought The Killer Joke got one.
That got like a 1-day release.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so let me clarify. A lot of animated Batman movies got like 1-day or 2-day releases. This got a full-on theatrical run.
Amazing. Okay,
it's set in the continuity of Batman the Animated Series
from the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was, and it came out in 1993.
Okay.
On Christmas.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is a case where the movie came out. It only made like $5 million.
Ouch.
And so it was deemed a financial failure. But once you learn the story of the movie, like the story behind the making of the movie, this will make a great podcast episode someday. But basically halfway through production, the animators were told that this was going to get a theatrical release. They were working on like a direct-to-video release. So they were scrambling to get the film done, and the marketing people, Warner Bros., didn't know how to market the film. so they just didn't really market it at all, and it opened on Christmas, and it did terribly. And to this day, a lot of people tout it as the definitive Batman movie. Like when people ask me, what's your favorite Batman movie? I say Mask of the Phantasm.
Amazing.
And they go, what is that? And I say, let me tell you about it.
Let me tell you a story about a man.
Because it is...
about a Batman.
Ignoring the fact that I love Batman the Animated Series, it presents the most definitive version of Batman, Bruce Wayne, on film.
Interesting.
But when it came out, it failed financially.
Right, but you still have that story and it's still canon, which is really, really nice. And for me, growing up with Batman the Animated Series in the 90s, it was so much story, so much content, and so much good content that like I couldn't see that repeated again, other than like even the Spider-Man animated series, which wasn't, I don't think, as perfect as the Batman animated series, but it was still good. Like they just did storytelling well in the 90s because you could only do a few things with animation, but you could write a good story.
So across all formats, mediums, do you have a favorite cult classic?
Oof, Mystery Science Theater 3000.
This Saturday on MST3K, Jack Frost. Night of 100 star doubles. Tom Petty. Freddie Mercury.
Val Kilmer as Prince Valiant. Join us, won't you?
Next Saturday at 5 and 11 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, I'm just going to put that out there, like definitely a huge one. The Monty Python series and Princess Bride, I grew up with as a kid, so I have nostalgia for those So Bad It's Good movies. Although the So Bad It's Good doesn't really apply to some of them, but yeah.
So your family, I guess, had those films in your catalog.
Yeah, so like we just had the movies. My dad really enjoyed like dry humor, and that was one of those things where you're just like, oh, okay, like this is the case.
So you were introduced to them because your family was part of the cult.
Yeah, part of the cult. One of us. We gathered around the dark television screen, lit the candles, and just watched the... I shared too much. They all know now.
So we truly live in a new era because with social media and the way in which people can instantly give their feedback to people creating shows and movies, it's very easy for those involved with the creation of film and television, even board games, to know what their audience is thinking.
Yeah, like the Sonic movie could have become a cult classic, but they're fixing it now, so it might have a decent release. Might also become a cult classic, though. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, and so I think the moral of the story here is, don't judge a book by its cover when it first comes out. Like we always talk about what the critics are thinking and what the audience...
Don't always judge it by its pages either, apparently. Because people watch the content of the pages and be like, no, this is not a good book. And then a month later, you're like, I should read that book again.
Yeah, so like when we talk about new movies, we always mention like the critics' reaction and the audience reaction. Those are certainly metrics to judge the quality of the film as it's being received in this time period.
Yeah.
But it does not mean that those...
in the alpha timeline.
Yeah, it does not mean that these opinions will last forever.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the audiences that are saying, we love this movie now, we'll love it in the future.
We will love it forever, and it's ours.
Yeah.
Yes.
So don't judge a book by its cover, because even though it might look bad now, it could become a cult classic later on.
And even though it looks good now, it might become terrible later on. Like, some movies from the 2000s did not age very well. Some did. Lord of the Rings.
So I think that's all we can really say about cult classics.
Yep.
Certainly, many of the podcast episodes we've done previously are about cult classics because they make for interesting stories.
Maybe one of our previous podcast episodes will become a cult classic.
Ooh.
People will listen to it like once a year.
Maybe this episode will do terribly.
And then in a few years, people are like, let's listen to the cult classic episode of The Bad Jar. And everyone will have it saved somewhere on their phone and be like, wait, I can find it. 1 second.
So no one share this episode.
Yeah.
We want no one to see it.
We want this to flop horribly.
And then in the future, there'll be an audience dedicated to just this one particular episode.
Yeah. My family will grow up on it. And they will share it. And like, for some reason, every Friday, we would listen to this one episode of podcast. We don't know why. But it's amazing.
And I should mention the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because that is a film that has had its cult classic status is so esteemed that it literally has had annual showings for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
Because it's almost become a subculture of itself, the fan base for that movie. So
yeah.
There you go. I think we should We would normally, go into the bat jar and look at our mail, but we've actually caught up on all our mail, so we don't have any this week.
Whoa, that's amazing. So, guys.
Yeah, you should
time to send your mail.
Yeah. So, how do they do that?
Well, they can contact us a variety of ways. One of them is using a tactical missile with a small note tied to it.
Last week you were really pushing for the birds.
I do think that carrier pigeon is the future, just as magnetic tape and cassettes should have been the future. I mean, what's more durable than magnetic tape? Maybe duct tape? Maybe duct tape.
Gorilla tape.
Oh, Gorilla tape. There we go. Boom. Problem solved. If you want to contact the show, other than carrier pigeon, with a question or idea for an episode, or just sending us some fan mail, be like, hey, I'm a fan. I'm a big metal fan.
You're part of the cult classic.
Yeah,
grouping.
Be part of the cult classic. It'll
the
be
subculture.
The bat jar subculture, where everyone is in the bat jar. No one knows where everyone went. You can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet at us with the Twitter birds.
At the Bat Cookie Jar.
Yeah. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, YouTube, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, right next to all the rappers, or wherever you get your podcasts. Usually, if we're not on there, once again, you can message us.
I wonder if any of these platforms will become cult classics later on.
Man, I think Vine is a cult classic. People wish they could get Vine back.
What about Tumblr? Is that still a thing?
Tumblr is still a thing, but they made some changes where people were moving away from it. MySpace did not become a cult classic. It just died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that did not die, MySpace was killed by Facebook.
Yep. And you can share our post on the Book of Faces. Oh, no, that's very different. That's something else.
Facebook is quite literally a book of all the faces of people you know.
Yeah, that's true. That's not too bad. And
doesn't sound creepy, does it?
No. This is my Facebook. I like them all. And make sure to like our page, because it'll show up and be like, so-and-so like this. And you're like, what the heck is this? And then you stumble across all our crazy episodes. Just because we want everyone to join us inside the Bat Jar. We really need some renovations done. So if you're good at renovating, we might put you to work inside the cookie jar.
And again, if we want this show to become a cult classic, we really need a small, dedicated fan base.
Rabid fans. You need to go get rabies and then become one of our fans.
I mean, I don't want to get rabies.
No, but our fans can get rabies.
But if they're in the Bat Jar with us, they're going to get us rabies,
That's
right?
why we need renovations done so we can get a proper cage.
Okay. Speaking of cages...
Nicolas Cage? Is that where we're going with this?
No, I can't think of a good segue.
Okay.
Basically, next week's episode is going to be covering a topic that I'm kind of glad that it's come to this. We're going to see the end of Fox's ownership of X-Men.
Oh, wow.
Because the final film that was produced by Fox about the X-Men is getting its release in theaters.
Okay, so I've got your connection. So... speaking of cages, we're about to see the last of a long series of intellectual properties that have been kept in a cage, in a corporate cage, that will finally see its release with this final poor trapped animal.
Dark Phoenix. That works because it's a bird.
There we go.
Oh, my goodness.
This beautiful bird has been trapped in a cage for too long, and it is now free. And if it dies, don't worry. It's a phoenix. It will come back to life after a cult following brings it back.
Wow. Well done.
Oh,
well done.
We got it.
That was not scripted at all.
We just brought that full circle.
But yeah, so Dark Phoenix is the final film as part of the Fox X-Men universe.
Which has been going for a long time.
Yeah, it'll be 19 years.
Ouch.
And good riddance, I say.
Yeah, not nearly as good as 11 years of Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And we've talked about this franchise a lot on the show. None of the core X-Men films have come out since the show started, but we have addressed the X-Men franchise in the past. We actually tied it into one of our very early episodes, tying X-Men together with Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
So for people who are new to the show, that's episode 6 or 7. I recommend going back and checking that one out.
Go back to the original. Okay.
So yes, next week we're going to be talking about X-Men Dark Phoenix. So get ready. We're going to have a going away party. And it's going to be nice.
It's going to be fantastic. We're going to fireworks, and it's going to be so much fun.
Yeah.
So much fun burying it. All right, bring your shovels, everyone, and bring your fireworks. We're going to bury it and then light those fireworks.
Oh, boy.
Oh dear.
Well, until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Pixel Patch.
Catch you on the flip side.
One pixel at a time.